A very warm welcome to the Royal Society Te Apārangi again, and to this panel discussion. I'm Gustav Kessel. I'm the Special Advisor to the International Science Council's Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science. Now I'm delighted to introduce you to this event. The International Science Council's Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science works at the intersection of science and human rights to protect the freedoms and promote the responsibilities that are critical for science to function as a global public good. And the freedoms that we need to do good science, to do responsible science, are under increasing pressure around the world. And we need to talk about that reality more. We need to recognize the threats that science faces globally, and we need to better understand what we can do to combat them. I hope you will leave tonight a little energized to help us in our mission, but I'll leave that to our speakers. And let me just point out that the Royal Society Te Apārangi has supported this important work for nearly 10 years now, and we acknowledge and thank MBIE for providing the funding that has made this possible. The committee is visiting Aotearoa New Zealand for the first time, and I'm pleased that some of its members can be here to speak to you tonight. We have Marcia Barbosa. She is the International Science Council's Vice President for Freedom and Responsibility in Science and Chair of the committee. She's a physicist and rector at the University of Rio Grande do Sul in Brazil, a science policy expert, and a globally recognized advocate for gender equality in science. Robert French is the former Chief Justice of Australia and former Chancellor of the University of Western Australia. Robert is a highly respected voice in the subject of academic freedom and freedom of speech in Australia's higher education sector. Krushal Watene is Professor of Philosophy at Waipapa Tomata Rau, the University of Auckland. Krushal researches fundamental questions in philosophy, ethics, politics, indigenous philosophy, and transdisciplinarity. Carly Kehoe is Professor of History at St. Mary's University in Canada, a Fellow of the Royal Society of Canada, and is highly involved in the committee's work on science in times of crisis, focusing on the threats faced by scientists and academics in times of war. She's also the founder of several initiatives aiming to assist displaced and at-risk academics around the world. And moderating tonight's discussion is Dacia Herbulock. Dacia is the director and a founding member of New Zealand's Science Media Centre and adjunct research fellow with the School of Science and Society at Te Waka, Victoria University of Wellington. With nearly 20 years' experience covering breaking science news stories and the evolution of controversial science issues in the public arena, who better to guide us through this complex conversation tonight? Dacia, over to you.
Thank you very much, Gustav. No mai haramai, welcome. It's great to see such a wonderful turnout on a weather-challenged evening. So I am honored to be here to hear the thoughts of this distinguished panel and to guide us through a conversation where we dig in on some of these very important issues for our times. So we'll start with you, Marcia, looking at a bit of a background. Tell us more about the committee's work. What is the Committee for Freedom and Responsibility in Science?
Okay, so the committee, we think about these two ingredients, freedom, but you might imagine, but everybody has freedom. Freedom to have access to science and to education is not a common ground in the planet. There are many places in which different parts, and women particularly, or other groups don't have the access to the science. And even in places in which you think, no, you have access to science for everybody because you're so wonderful and democratic. If you go to fields like my field, that's physics, we are in low numbers, like 8%, 5% of women. What means that at some point in our lives, we didn't have the access. Someone told us it's not for you. And you have to revert that because you have to have, a global understanding that everybody have the right to access science, but also the right to participate. That's slightly different. The right to be in the field, to explore science, and also the right to communicate science. And again, people know everybody has the right to say whatever. That's not true. Today, if you speak about gender, if you speak about environment, if you speak about a number of topics, you are attacked. So we don't have for granted this field, and part of the International Science Council is to work on that. And bring to the scientists also the responsibility that when you have the access to science, you bring other groups with you. You're not just, oh, I succeed, I'm there, so I ignore. So we have to bring equity when you have access. When you participate, you have to follow the rules of science in the sense that you have all these regulations and practice that are different for every single field, but you have to obey that. And when communicating, again, you have to be accessible and reach people and go to that. And this was the thing, many of the things we are discussing, how we generate this atmosphere in the whole planet. Only that.
Robert, can you give us a bit of a sense of some of the cases and challenges that the committee grapples with?
Well, I think we've seemed to be faced with a whole array of challenges and cases, particularly in the area of the sort of areas that Marcia has spoken of, but also in the area of trust in science, which we have been addressing. And the problem today with what we might call declining trust in science is it's part of a larger issue of declining trust in civil institutions around the world. I recently did a piece on democracies at risk for a public law class and looked at some recent international surveys. The VDEM survey, for example, shows an increasing skepticism around the world about the efficacy of democracy and institutions associated with it. There's another survey called the Edelman Trust Barometer. And one of the most disturbing things that has come up with in the context of Australia, for example, is that there is an increasing acceptance of aggressive action by segments of the population. By aggressive action, I mean action which ranges from attacking people on social media through to actual physical violence. So when we talk about the position of science as an enterprise which is associated with institutions and excellence and all the rest of it, it cannot be disentangled from those general societal problems that we are currently facing. And part of our role, of course, is to try to find effective ways of communicating the importance of science to our society, and not least in the area of, I think, basic scientific literacy. So these are all parts of the responsibilities of scientists and also part of what we call the right to participate in and benefit from science. Now, I just have to add one qualification to anything I say here today. When I finished my science degree in physics, third year, I had to give a seminar presentation to my fellow students, and my presentation was on mathematical group theory and elementary particles, which was a hot topic in 1967, which is Murray Gell-Mann got the Nobel Prize for it. At the end of my presentation, the professor of physics said, "You express yourself magnificently, but I'm not sure you know what you're talking about." And so encouraged and qualified, I enrolled in law.
Yes.
Never regret it.
Found your niche, yes. Krishna, coming to you. So we've heard a bit about referencing this thing, science. So the International Science Council, which the committee responds to, has a very inclusive understanding of science. Can you help illuminate that for this audience?
Ngā mihi mga ha kia koutou I tēnei wā, ko kusho wā tēnei tēnei mihi atu nei he uri no Ngāti Manu, te hikatu Ngāti Whātua Rākei, me tunga. So one of the exciting things that the committee does and that the International Science Council does, I mean, just building on what's been said already. So when you start talking about freedom and responsibility in science, you need to actually outline what that means, right? You need to talk about the kinds of freedoms you're talking about. And then very quickly, as we've heard, you start to realize that you can't really talk about freedom without responsibilities too, because you need certain kinds of guarantees. And then you you're committing to creating an environment where science, defined as the International Science Council does, and defined in documents like the right to science, to participate and benefit from science, how science features within that. And that includes diverse knowledges, right? And so it means that there's recognition of the different places that we find science, the different scales at which we find science locally and nationally and regionally and globally too, and that we need to sort of harness all of the places in which we find it, but also to kind of encourage and enable those places and that knowledge to thrive. And that includes, of course, Indigenous and local knowledge. And we know that Māori knowledge here provides a beautiful and really important account of the knowledge that we find in these lands and waterscapes, and has for a long time.
Yeah, sure. Kylie, coming to this idea of freedoms and responsibilities, returning to this idea, what help us to understand a bit more broadly? So we heard a bit about the freedoms. What about more of the responsibilities? How do you see that as a social scientist?
Yeah. I'm a humanities scholar.
Humanities scholar.
I think we have a lot of responsibility at the moment, actually. And I think I've been learning a little bit about what's going on in New Zealand, but it's happening all over the world, where certain disciplines are being asked to justify their existence. And I think in a way we have a responsibility to engage with that. And one of the things that I think we have a really big responsibility to do is engage with those people who for so long have been excluded from the process. And it can be various Indigenous groups. I'm from Canada. We are at the very start of our reconciliation process, and it is very complex and it is very difficult, and it is going to take conversations for decades. But there's also the fact that many of our universities are surrounded by these communities that we have nothing to do with. And that's a big problem, because we are asking the public to support us, but they don't understand what it is they're supporting because they're being excluded. So part of our responsibility, I think, and as a historian, you see what exclusion does over time. But our responsibility is to think about how can we do better research? How can we do better science by rethinking our processes? And I'm certainly keen to do more on the co-creation of research side. So I'm a historian and I deal with the British Empire and I deal with colonialism, but I don't know it all. And I don't know what neighbors and relatives are thinking about it. But I do know that they have an interest and they have opinions, and that they're just not to be disregarded. So that's what I think on the responsibility side.
Right. I'm interested to hear more about the decline in academic freedoms, which is something that we've heard a little bit about, but I know this is something that the committee tracks as well over time. There are various academic freedom indexes that you reference. Can you give us a bit more of a picture of the global picture? What is happening recently?
It's the trust in science, this academic freedom, is something that is increasing over time. And this is sad, because actually we have this wonderful proof that science is something that made possible for most of the people in this room to be alive today, since in the Middle Age, probably most of us would not be alive because the life expectancy was very low. So science keep on showing its power, but there is this force I think well-funded force that try to decrease the trust in science. So we have, and some people, particular people are more attacked than the others. Over the pandemic, a lot of people that went in front, they discussed with the population, they're put in prison. And then when we have a government that will be too strong, they will be people that have to run away. And imagine if you're a scientist, you participate in collaboration, suddenly you have to move your life out. Or you're environmentalist. In Latin America, where I'm from, the environmentalists are the most attacked scientists, because they are the ones telling you should not cut the trees, you should not burn the Amazon forest, you should not dig oil in the Amazon forest. And that's not something that usually the business sector want to hear. So those people are under attack, in part not looking to the specific, but looking to the general trend is also part of our job. We are not looking case by case, only very specific case, but you look to the general picture and you get really worried about the current situation.
You have a unique perspective as this committee, being able to get input from all of the different academies around the world, and to see as well and track the situations that are happening in many different countries, those that are in crisis. What are some of the things that you've seen over your time on the committee? Specific examples, please, of where we're losing the academic freedom, or where those threats are going beyond what we have seen as a regular feature. What is changing in more recent years?
Well, I think we all know of examples of academic or scientific research which yields politically inconvenient results. And I suppose a primary example of that is some of the stuff that's happening in the US at the moment in terms of attacks on science and the rise of what I can call an anti-science agenda, especially in the medical health area. There are many ways, of course, there are many dimensions to the pressures that science faces. That sort of authoritarian political level is one. We also have the intersection with science and private industry and funding. And of course, one of the things the ISC has been developing or has developed is a call for funding transparency. In other words, that we should know who is funding a particular science research project, because you need to know what the interests are that might be being served by and that might influence the outcomes. It doesn't mean that everybody who researches for example, a pharmaceutical company is going to produce a result that's beneficial to the company, but
Yes.
one would scrutinise the results, the effect. Another area in which I was personally involved, in which there is pressure on academic freedom sometimes, is within universities. And one of the things that I did in Australia was to generate a model code for academic freedom and freedom of speech for academics within universities, because you have lots of codes of conduct which include such things as shall not engage in conduct which brings the university into disrepute. Now you ask the question, disrepute with whom? Yes. Donors, government, influential sectors of society. So it's not just the bad external world, it's sometimes the institutions itself that you have to look to your game.
Crucial, you're a former member of the committee. So looking back over the years that you were active, do you have reflections to share?
Do I have
Reflections to share.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I think the committee ought to do as well as tracking the deficit that we find, is actually showcasing the really good examples that we find around the world where communities are working with scientists, for instance, where there's collaboration and partnership. And I think more emphasis on that kind of work that happens. And there's lots of that work happening in New Zealand, despite lots of moves to prevent it. I think that could be something that the committee can focus on more. Thank you.
Yeah. Carla, you've been leading a project around science and crisis. Can you explain a bit more where that came from and what has progressed over time?
So the leadership of the groups or the programs that I've had has contributed to the science in times of crisis, but I was involved with several societies and started to become aware, particularly in 2015 when there was the crisis in Syria, which resulted in significant numbers of folks migrating into Europe. And there were a bunch of us that were convened to talk about, from various research backgrounds, to talk about what could we do to help. And you feel really intimidated, because how are you supposed to deal with something like this? And at the time, I was living in Scotland, and I was co-chair of the Royal Society of Edinburgh's Young Academy, and I was trying to figure out, what could I do to make space in the world I understood. And so it was the very first Young Academy in the world that established an at-risk scholar program where we enabled direct membership for refugees who were displaced to Scotland. And that's a really important thing. And then we brought it into the Global Young Academy. So there were colleagues that worked with me there to develop it. And then we brought it into the Royal Society of Canada at the college level. And now I'm very happy to say it's being introduced at the senior level. And I think we might be the only senior society in the world where we are going to have a direct membership stream. And the purpose of that is to recognize that as a group of researchers, we have to come together to support each other. And displacement of research is a massive problem for the health of a global research ecosystem. And countries that are stable at the moment, Canada, we've got some challenges, but we should be able to offer places to colleagues to continue to do the research that they have been doing. And I think with the committee, that's one of the things that I've been able to really contribute, which is, what do we know about folks who have been displaced? What is the potential loss, not just to the countries, but to the economies of those countries, to the future rebuilding of those countries, to the young people who are coming up, so that they can have something that's hopeful. I think that we're all facing serious adversity, but there are things that we can do. I think we just need to be brave enough. And when I was proposing these things, I must say, I did not encounter anybody who said no. Everybody said, how can we help? And that was quite a message to us.
You mentioned Syria. Are there other examples globally that are worth focusing on?
That are worth focusing?
Highlighting what we've learned from watching those examples. Yes. Tell us more about
Afghanistan, we're talking about gender inequalities. There's basically a ban on women in any kind of education. They're excluded from the science infrastructure, so those girls and women need support of the international community. There's Yemen, there's Eritrea. In Canada, we are getting increasing requests for support from colleagues in the United States. This is something that we would never have thought would happen. So these conflicts are going to continue to go. We just have to I think we have to have programs that can kick in as soon as they happen.
Can you speak to the example of Nicaragua?
Again, when you have, I can see these questions in three different ways. One is when you have a country against another country in which, people just have to move because you're in the middle of the war. A second example is when come a dictatorship, someone that have their own mind of what science is and just say, I'm, sending away all the scientists, I'm creating my own Academy of Science with the people that I want, and that's the Nicaragua case. But also, every time you have someone coming to power with a totalitarian view, this person is going to attack science. Because science is about thinking, questioning. So they remove the money. That's one way, a mild way, I might say. Then remove the money of part of the sciences, particularly the social science, and they, preserve, like in the dictatorship of Brazil, they preserve the physicists, but they attack the historian, the philosophers, all of them hugely attack. And Nicaragua is this, they are attacked, the scientists. And when you do that, the international community have to find a way to network and protect these people. But there will be a next level of attack into the population, that's climate change. When you face a disaster in climate change, again, you're going to observe people have to move. Science is being destroyed because people are not getting prepared for the consequences of climate change. And again, they are not getting prepared because they are not listening to scientists. So again, we have many different levels in which listening what the scientists are saying and the responsibility of the scientists to tell what they know, because we don't know everything. We say, I know this, I'm not sure about this, I have doubts about that, maybe tomorrow I'll know more. Having this dialogue with the communities, you create this real trust to science, being honest and bringing the limitations. So that is a movement that combines the freedom I need to have to do the science I do with the responsibility of never lying to the public about my uncertainties.
Good. Crucial. How do you see New Zealand fitting into this global context?
It's a great question. I think New Zealand, but also our region, Australasia, but also the Pacific countries, I think we're such a hub of insight. Actually, the Asia-Pacific region alone is home to 2/3 of the world's indigenous people. For instance, 300 languages and cultures. That is such a knowledge base, right? So much beautiful information, scientific information that we share with the world. In some ways, the Pacific, the ocean itself, it's like one of the heartbeats of the globe, right? And so I think we have lots to contribute, and I think that we could be leaders in demonstrating how we can create a scientific network in this region that thrives in all the ways that we want it to. But,
Robert, coming to your experiences, what are your thoughts on the ways in which we heard a little bit about mobilizing to support colleagues who are directly impacted? What are the other ways in which there's meaningful response? This work of the committee, there can be a lot of discussion and good intentions, but what can you concretely do to change things?
Well, I think that there's a question we always have to ask, and that is, how can our advocacy be effective? To whom is it directed, and will they understand? I mean, there is a lot of what I call vaporous language around in the world, which nobody can sort of get a handle on. I think it's very important, for example, that our principles of freedom and responsibility in science are really just one-liners, which you can flesh out, but they need to be readable and readily communicable. So effective communication to different audiences according to particular situations is just fundamental. Sometimes, of course, we're like Sisyphus rolling the rock uphill and it rolls down again. There are other underlying systemic problems, even in Australia, which we have to address, and I'm sure it's a situation which is not limited to Australia, but that is basic scientific literacy. If you do not have a society where there is an understanding of at least the basics of the science culture, that there is such a thing as science, that there are scientists who can never give you complete answers, but can give you reasonably reliable answers upon which you can make decisions. That there's been a decline in scientific studies, and that's connected with a larger issue which I'm concerned about in Australia at the moment, and others are, and that's civics education generally, just understanding your society and the institutions. If you don't understand that, you don't trust anybody who says anything to you, and more so if you come from another country where you've been exposed to a government that you could never trust, and institutions that are corrupt and so forth. So there are many levels which have to be addressed, some systemic, some episodic, but it's a massive task, and I'm glad to be involved in it.
Sure. Carly, coming to you. I want to come back to the question of the US. We've heard you saying you're surprised to hear colleagues reaching out. And we have been watching very carefully, I think, globally this year to see a number of the rippling impacts of very concrete, tangible things. When databases have suddenly, huge repositories of information suddenly under threat, potentially disappearing overnight. People who are no longer able to continue the work that they've started or kept in uncertainty for really long periods of time, not knowing what the outcomes will be. So a little bit more on your reflections for the observations from what it's looked like from the other side of the border.
From the United States? Oh, yeah, okay. Good question. I think it's certainly shaken us. It's shaken us in a way that we weren't, I think, ever expecting. Colleagues have lost research funding because they have been in joint projects, and all of a sudden they're gone. And so not people's life's work, but a lot of serious investment in their time and energy has just evaporated. There's also an unwillingness to travel across the border to go to conferences. I haven't gone. My husband went once, but stopped all other conferences. It was something that you took for granted. You could just, because we are so close, we have relatives and friends, and the border is unguarded, and have any of you been to Canada? It's gigantic. and so that's all of these things we took for granted for a really long time, that you could just do whatever you wanted, and we are very privileged in Canada and the United States too. And I think sometimes we forget that, but when there's a crisis, and this is a real crisis, all of a sudden you're forced to think about what happens when it goes wrong. And our universities are suffering from a lack of enrollment because the government has just said no, they've really reduced the number of international students. But that has knock-on effects too, because the collaboration that was happening at even a student level between Canada and the United States, exchanges, those are stopped. Our students are being told, do not cross the border. High school kids are being told, do not cross the border. There are no high school trips to the United States. In my lifetime, I never expected this. I'm a historian, so I spent the afternoon saying we're gloomy and we see really bad things all the time. And yet there are things that still surprise me. And so this soft diplomacy is really important, but it's also really scary.
Are there any examples that, any things that resonates with you from those examples you hear? Again, that sort of element of surprise in terms of your experience from a Latin American perspective.
I'm from Brazil, so imagine low funding. So we live with this scenario of United States year by year because of the cuts. And for the first time, they were writing to us asking to move to Brazil.
Wow.
Because of the lack of funds. And we are like, wow, what can you do to be, enable these scientists, because they are panicking, because suddenly something that was normal for them to have funding every year was disrupted. And they couldn't mention certain words on doing, the proposals. So I think that a powerful thing is the support of the community. And it's something that we scientists, we have to learn to have that. And I'm going to give an example. We had this Brazilian scientist that over a very strong government in Brazil was persecuted because he showed data showing that the Amazon was being burned much more than ever. And the government started to persecute. But this was a well-known guy, and then well-spoken in the media, etc. So kind of the population protects him. And he nowadays is in our parliament. So it's you can save science, but we need the population. We need this dialogue. We need to talk to governments, to talk to the business sector, but also we need to talk to the people and use the proper language to do that. That's not easy because I don't think any of us learn to do that. So it's a new type of knowledge we have to bring in a way that we are together with the people. It's not easy.
Yes, can be done though. Kurshal, you talked about being an example for the rest of the world. And I'm curious what you think are the areas you would like to see more lessons that you'd like to see others picking up from what your experiences have been here in New Zealand.
What's always inspiring for me is the work that I see happening in all of our communities. Actually, one of my communities, Ngāti Manu in the far north, in the Bay of Islands, we've been heavily involved in lots of different projects in science, collaborating with scientists from a range of universities and institutes. A recent project that we've been participating in, and this is the local community, right? So I support them, but they're the people that are up there, the kind of ahika that are doing this work, our kaitiaki, if you like. They've been involved in automated eDNA monitoring, marine monitoring in the Bay of Islands for biosecurity. So our young people, our taiyohi, have been able to deploy those devices, learn about them, think about how they relate, what information we get, what that looks like, how that relates to other parts of our environment, how we can apply that to planning for the future, right, for our young people. And then also relating those learnings to other knowledge about taonga species, about our kōrero, and other relevant and connected mātauranga too. So I think you don't have to look too far to see lots of work like that happening around New Zealand, despite many changes that we're facing. And beyond Māori communities too. Lots of environmental organisations working really, really hard to do that. And I think that gives me lots of hope.
Have you seen a change in attitude towards science from especially the young people who are involved in that hands-on way?
Science, as we all know, science doesn't just need, really clear definitions, which I absolutely, as a philosopher, find convincing too. Love it. But it's such a wonderful thing to cultivate imagination, right? That's one of the beauties of science. And you see that in our young people, right? That they are already loving science. It doesn't take that much for our young people to love science and to see its value. And if we can cultivate that, this participation in science at those levels, I think science stands a chance.
I could supplement that. There's an organisation I was involved with called the Polly Farmer Foundation, named after a famous Australian footballer. And he generated the beginnings of this foundation about 26, 27 years ago to provide what you might call uplift or stimulation programs for First Peoples kids in primary and secondary schools. And the Follow the Dream program has been a great success, but an important starting element have been STEM clubs in primary schools. That's science, technology, etc. And it's been very comforting to see a number of very impressive alumni coming out in the range of fields. At UWA, which is the university which I was Chancellor, I'm not sure how many science graduates we have, but we've produced at least 250 Indigenous lawyers in recent times.
The value of the interdiscipline, yes. We're not going to champion one discipline too much in this talk. Thank you.
Lawyers can't avoid the science. Yes. This is something that I've found, that in legal practice there are so many issues where science and technology intersect with the law. And so science is not a little kingdom on its own. It's interactive and pervasive, and I had a lot of cases with scientific issues in them, and as a practitioner and as a judge.
Excellent. I want to bring us around to this idea of science as a global public good. So this is something, we've heard of a few examples that might fit into this category, but I want you to really make the case for it. Why should people who distrust science, who are skeptical, why should they be invested in this? What is the public good aspect of science? Kylie, can you start us?
I would change it just a little bit, and I would say, why should we invest in them? Because I think that we have a real responsibility to reach beyond the universities and beyond the research networks. Because just to set an example for the young people coming up. So I'm from a very rural part of Canada in the province of Nova Scotia. When I was going to school, we never met anybody from a university. And so there's a colleague of mine, and we run an emerging researcher program, and we do it as for volunteer. We don't get any extra money. We actually have a lot of time that we have to spend. But the purpose is and it links to your point, Robert, about helping students understand the process of research and knowledge production. Because the only time those kids, and I don't know if it's the same in New Zealand, but the only time those kids see a professor is when they come on campus for a recruiting fair, or when recruiters, and they're not even profs, they're recruiters that go to the schools just to try to get the students to sign up. There's no investment in those students. There's no investment in those communities. And so I would like to see that. And if we're talking about a public good, Canada, we have serious investment of the public purse in higher education. And I feel like we have to do a lot better. And the humanities can do that. We have land grants as part of our history in Canada, and we brought those into the school to help the students see. And these kids still live on the land, many of them, that those land grants come from. So 200 years in some cases. And we got them to think about the formation of their community. And then they started thinking about entrepreneurship, and they started thinking about Indigenous displacement. And they actually started thinking about women's role in a local economy. These are things we never forecasted. So that's what I would do. I would invest in that public good. And instead of just saying, why don't people trust us more? It's like, well, we need to give them a reason to trust us in the first place. And I don't think we're doing a good enough job.
Call to action from you, Marcia, for your fellow scientists.
Yes, I think not only the fellow scientists, each person can, use the knowledge you have in science to actually discriminate what is science in this huge amount data that we have in our social media with a lot of things that are not correct or not true, and compare and look for good sources and say, wait, from where this is coming. Which one of us can be a scientist regarding information? And look the source, look the evidence. And if you do that, we already advance somehow the trust of science. We are going to end up in the pages of the people that really do the good science communication. I challenge you.
Crucial, same to you. What is it that you want to see researchers around the world doing more of, doing differently to build this trust?
Similar to what Kylie has said, I think, reconnecting with communities. But if I could reframe the question too, what I would say to my communities in the north and elsewhere, to Indigenous communities globally is that science is useful. You can see yourself in science, but you can also see, as the International Science Council defines it, our knowledge in science too as part of that kete of knowledge, not just as an archive, right, as kind of this historical knowledge detailing observations, but even as a practice too. Knowledge is a practice too in monitoring and decision making, but even more as a philosopher, as the knowledge is being fundamental to how we might see the world and the kinds of information that we might be looking for and how that can be transformational for all of us.
Starting with this end, Carly, coming back, I'd like to hear from you your personal motivations. What is it that causes you to devote your time towards hearing about these cases and grappling with trying to support scientists in time of crisis, and also to build the case for freedom and responsibility?
So there's my advocacy hat, which is we need to build and promote a global research ecosystem that includes all voices. It cannot just be Western, and it cannot just be male. And so we need to make space for more diverse voices. And it also means helping our colleagues who are in really difficult situations and telling them that the knowledge they hold is valuable, and that wherever they come from, there is a community of people prepared to help. I think that is really important. I think also from a research perspective, I'm a historian of migration, and I really think that I'm motivated by the need to support my region. It's an economically challenged region on the east coast of Canada. If there are people like me living there who do not speak up and who do not get involved in their community, we're in a lot of trouble. So in a way, I want to model behavior for the young people, but also for my community to say, I've not just gone away and got a degree and left you all. I'm still part of us. And I think that's important. So that's what motivates me.
Crystal, your motivations?
Similarly, I'd like to think that most scholars and practitioners all really care about leaving a world better than the one we inherited, right? And that we should, at the very least, leave some footprints that are going to be worth following by other people. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think in terms of the importance of enhancing everybody's humanity, if you like, by giving them an understanding of the basics of science and the universe in which we live, the world in which we live. And that's right across the board. I'm not marginalised communities as well as central urban communities, because I think we do have a serious problem at the moment in terms of, there's never been so much science communication going on. There's a huge number of popular science books, for example, and you go onto YouTube and you'll see IAI and World Forum and stuff, but there is also an awful lot of what I call scientific illiteracy, and that creates a hinterland into which the snake oil salesmen come, and that diminishes us all.
The motivations. What brings you to keep fighting this fight?
I grew up in a dictatorship. People would disappear. Then you have this crazy government in which people would be put into silence and some environmentalists would be killed. So I think we need to stand up for what you believe, and I believe science is the way that can put people together and solve things. And for me, the pandemic is a clear case in which we rushed and we were able, with the proper funding, to solve a problem. And we have a big problem ahead of us, that is climate. And we have to get together, scientists, population, to solve this problem. So that's what's motivated me. And I think we only will be able to do that if you have diversity. While we exclude women, while we exclude other minorities, it'll be very hard to solve any issue. We need 100% of the population thinking, working together, and not excluding anyone.
Excellent. All right. I would like to throw things open now for questions from the audience.